Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined, as always, by Scott Pianowski. Scott, we had a full weekend of MLB games. We can now talk about our reactions to MLB players facing MLB players in MLB stadiums. It feels good to be back.
Oh, it feels wonderful. I'm all ready for some confirmation bias. I'm all ready for some overreaction theater. Detroit Tigers, going to win 107 games and storm to the World Series. As long as they can play the White Sox, another 100 times. But yeah, it's great. What a fun weekend, NCAA basketball going on. I'm a big NCAA hockey guy. Had some exciting action there. So I had all three screens working in my office, and obviously, a ton of baseball was going on the last 4 days. And, we had almost every team playing today. Hopefully the weather will be okay.
Yeah, the weather doesn't look like it's gonna what's the word I'm looking for, man? The weather doesn't look like it's gonna cooperate. That's what I'm talking about for the first games.
Which is okay. You know what? If that happens, it happens. I mean, that may spare us from, playing baseball in 38-degree weather or something like that. But baseball's back. It's glorious. Fantasy baseball is back. It's glorious. And if you got anything wrong, remember, over at Yahoo Sports, you can always start a league at any point. So, I have one team with Royce Lewis and a bunch of other guys who are already hurt. That team looks shipwrecked. I'll try to fix it. But maybe the way I fix it is by drafting again.
Yeah, why not? Just take a mulligan and start all over.
For sure.
You mentioned, obviously, that we're optimistic. We are going to talk about some recent news before we go to our takeaways from opening weekend, primarily focus on the takeaways from opening weekend, but we do have to go over things that happened, and it's not all positive news. You kind of hinted at the lead story, which is that Royce Lewis is out. Royce Lewis had a homer, was 2 for 2 in his first 2 at-bats of the game, and then suffered a quad strain rounding second base on opening day. The Twins have referred to it as a severe quad strain. He is shut down totally for a month from anything. And then they will reevaluate his timeline, decide how long it will take him to ramp up, decide if he can get back to baseball activities, whatever. To me, that feels like a minimum of 2 months without Royce Lewis. If after a month, they're even going to just look at the timeline. So obviously in a league with IL spots, you're moving him into the IL and you're crossing your fingers. If you have limited IL spots, Scott, if you're in a league like the NFBC where you have no IL spots, can you hold Royce Lewis for a minimum of 2 months on your bench? Should you?
I think you have to try. We saw what the upside was last year, 921 OPS. This is a former number 1 overall pick in the draft, somebody who you probably, and again, I went the whole preseason without drafting him. It's not that I didn't like him. I just thought he would percolate it into an ADP area I didn't trust. And I was mindful of his injury history. I certainly, nobody expects anybody to get hurt on opening day, but you've invested so much in Lewis and the upside is so great that it would have to be an extremely unusual set of circumstances before I would drop him. But it's soul crushing to lose somebody for a third of the season up front.
Yeah.
And I always say this: injury optimism is not your friend. Whenever they say timetables, whenever they say for somebody 6 to 8 weeks, I want you to hear the 8 and then understand that then there's that gap where they come back and maybe they need to ramp up. Maybe they don't play right away. It's not like they immediately come back and they perform the way we expected to before the season. So one of my favorite things to do in leagues that do allow for trading is I love to trade out of my hurt guys. And again, I don't mean to be cavalier about it. This is somebody's livelihood. This is somebody's career. I wish everybody good health, but I love if I could get, I don't know, a chunk of Royce Lewis's perceived value in a trade right now. I mean, I would be all about doing that if I could.
Yeah, I think we know he has a history of leg injuries, ACL injuries. I think with this quad strain, when he comes back, fingers crossed, when he comes back, I just don't think you're going to see him run the way he might have run if he was fully healthy. So you have to take that into account when you're thinking about what his fantasy value is going to be. The bat will likely still be strong as he is in the lineup. How often is he going to be in the lineup? So yeah, I mean, I think you put him on your IL. You have to, if you have an IL spot. I would do everything I can to not get rid of him. But if I'm in an NFBC league like that, we'll see what happens in the next few weeks. But if I really needed pitching, if I was crushed with pitching, and I had guys like Gavin Williams or Brian Wu on my bench, guys who I know are coming back in a couple of weeks, I might jettison Royce Lewis to keep those guys rather than, because in an NFBC format, you can't really stockpile 2-3 IL guys on your bench. You just don't have that flexibility. This does, to me, make Willie Castro a little bit more interesting. He was going to mix and match in center field with Byron Buxton and around the infield. I think he's going to play a lot of third base against right-handed pitching, and then also play in the outfield regularly. And Castro is somebody who he's connected to your Detroit Tigers, and he's got a little bit of that Detroit Tiger charm on him. But in his first year with the Twins last year, he stole 33 bases and played 124 games while hitting 257. So there's a good chance, at just 27 years old, that Castro can steal 20 or 30 bases again in near full-time playing time and has lots of positional eligibility. So, I kind of like him, only 10% rostered in Yahoo formats right now. Great guy in a lot of league types to have as like a bench bat who you can fill in, anywhere on your roster if you need some speed.
As you mentioned, second base, third base, outfield eligibility in Yahoo. And even though he does have some swing and miss in his game, he'll also take a walk. He's already walked 3 times in 11 plate appearances. He was somebody who in deeper leagues, I kept looking at and thinking, I don't trust. There's so many injury risks on this roster with Buxton, with Kirilloff, with Lewis. Somebody's going to get hurt. They have other guys who are dinged up right now. I just, you knew Willie Castro would be needed for like 450 or 500 plate appearances. You just didn't know when they would come, where they would come. But, and again, this is more of a deeper league strategy, but when you have a player like Castro where anybody gets hurt and he's the next man up because he roves all over the field and everything, he covers so many different spots, it's easy to, he would have been like a great AL only draft choice or something like that, or a really deep mixed league where you're just searching for that playing time. You always want, your goal is always to have the most at bats in your league. The idea being that means you're getting guys in good lineups, you're getting guys who bat near the top of the order, and you'll figure out everything else when you figure it out. So
that makes it a lot easier for sure.
For sure.
Another big injury was Cub starter Justin Steele strained his hamstring fielding his position. So we know he's on the IL. It is a relatively significant hamstring strain from what they've mentioned. It is a little bit more flexible in terms of deadlines. I know because of a video I saw earlier today, he was throwing on the field before the Cubs, during the Cubs warm up today. The Cubs are one of the early games. To me, that signifies this isn't a long IL stint, right? If his hamstring was really bothering him, he's not throwing. I mean, the video of him is like actually going through his windup a little bit in the outfield, like lifting his leg, driving off his leg. So, you don't have a guy doing that prior to a game if he's going to be shut down for weeks with an injury. So I feel like this isn't necessarily a long IL stint for Justin Steele. And they called up Ben Brown to replace him. Ben Brown has lots of command issues in the minors, and he got shelled in his first start. So to me, this seems like just hold on Justin Steele. I'm not really adding Ben Brown anywhere, and I just expect in 2 weeks this to just drop. But I'm curious if you have a different take on the situation.
No, that's exactly how I would spin it. Brown is not fantasy viable, and at least with Steele, it's a body injury. It's not an arm injury. That's the whole thing with pitchers, right? Just nothing to do with the elbow, nothing to do with the forearm, nothing to do with the shoulder. You don't want any injuries, but at least if it's something that's going to heal, that's an oblique injury, a hamstring injury, a foot injury, a finger injury, something like that, you can live with it. You just don't want it arm related.
Yeah, I fully agree on that. Another injury, we got Eloy Jimenez. This is like, you don't want to, as you mentioned, like these are human beings trying to make a living, and you never want to belittle an injury struggle. It's just like on the opening weekend, 2 of the most often injured players got injured. Eloy Jimenez had an adductor strain on a swing on Sunday. They have not yet put him on the IL. They are quote unquote evaluate. And this is as of like 1:00 on Monday. They are evaluating their options. However, they already have Livan Sosa in the clubhouse. He was called up from AAA. He is in the clubhouse. The White Sox beat reporters have tweeted that he's there. I don't imagine they call him up if they're not eventually putting Eloy Jimenez on the IL. This was part of the reason why Eloy Jimenez was getting drafted so late. Gavin Sheets is starting at DH over him, so I guess Gavin Sheets will DH against righties. Does any of this move the needle for you in any way? Do you care?
I'm just glad I don't have Eloy Jimenez. I mean, last year he played 120 games, which is almost a career high. He's never played more than 122 games, and he had no PS plus of 104. I mean, it's just not. He came up. We thought he was going to be a special talent. He was so good those first 2 seasons, and he's leveled off because of injury problems, because of holes in his swing. This White Sox team. I want no part of it. Michael Kopech. I'm open minded to him. Maybe he can percolate to the top of the closer list there if they have. They're going to win 55 or 60 games. They are such a bad team, and Eloy, I don't have. Again, it's no fun. When he first came up, Eric, I can't believe this team. They had Eloy Jimenez, and they had they made the Chris Sale trade, and they looked like they were loaded with all these up and coming players, and nobody has hit. Juan Moncada is not the guy we thought he was going to be, and Jimenez isn't the guy we thought he's going to be, and Tim Anderson, who was a blast for so many years, he fell off the table. He's obviously with Miami now, and I don't know what their plan is. I don't know what they're selling right now. I know they want a new ballpark and everything, but they could be the worst team in baseball. We know the situation in Oakland is bad, but Chicago, I cannot wait. Every week I go to the schedule and I say, who is playing Chicago? Right. I want to gang up on this team as much as I can.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because there are some guys that are still individually a little bit interesting, right? I kind of like Andrew Vaughn. I kind of like Garrett Crochet. Like these are guys, we'll talk about in a little bit. I like Luis Robert. I just, Michael Kopech looks great out of the bullpen.
He does.
I'm just not entirely sure what fantasy value you have on this team. And that's unfortunate. The total flip side of that is a team like the Braves, who just being in that lineup gives you a tremendous amount of fantasy value because of the hitters around you. Unfortunately for the Braves, they're going to be without their starting catcher, Sean Murphy, for probably a month. They said it's a grade 1 oblique strain, so that is the lowest grade, but obliques are tough. We know that they are impacted on just the nature of a swing. It's April, so the Braves aren't going to rush him back. So Travis d'Arnaud is definitely going to see the majority of starts for the Braves for probably a month. Is this just a 2-catcher league thing for you? Or if you are in a 12-team league and you took, a catcher really late, would you be interested in a 1-catcher format in Travis d'Arnaud?
I think the catcher position is deep enough that I probably wouldn't go that far. Although anybody in any port in that storm, I'm thrilled about. And I just want to quickly back up about the White Sox. I said how I wanted to gang up on them. They do get Atlanta this week, so that's going to be fun. So maybe Ronaldo Lopez on Tuesday, and then they get a 4-game set. The White Sox I'm talking about with Kansas City. So if you're on the fence with Seth Lugo, with Brady Singer, who looked good this week, Michael Wacha, Marsh is the guy who pitches on Sunday. This is what you're looking for a lot of those guys who are borderline, rosterable, borderline startable. If you don't start a pitcher against the White Sox, why are you even rostering him? So I'm really excited to see what Singer might do in that game. Walker's a guy who's going to be probably a stream pick on the weekend. So that's how we take advantage of that. But you're obviously Atlanta, one of the 2 or 3 best lineups in baseball. You can make the case that they're the best lineup in baseball, and it's 1 through 9. There's a buoyancy there. So d'Arnaud he's kind of like, it's like if you're streaming catcher, which you may do, right? Or sometimes if you're in a daily transaction league, you have that day where only 4 or 5 teams play. He's available. He's confirmed in the lineup. You pop him in, you take him out, you play him in DFS, stuff like that. Travis d'Arnaud is a good hitter. He's just not Sean Murphy.
Yeah, for sure. I think that one of the side effects of catcher being so deep is that there are a lot of options. So you might decide in a 12-team league, if you have one catcher spot and you didn't pick a catcher early, you might decide, listen, there's value on the waiver wire every single week, and I'm going to look at the schedule and I'm going to chase 7 games. I'm going to chase games in Coors. I'm going to chase, and you could certainly do that. And I think that Travis d'Arnaud enters that conversation for the next month, because if the Braves play 7 games, he's probably starting 5 of them. At worst, he's starting 4 of them. And in that lineup, you're going to want guys who have that kind of, those kind of games. You mentioned they have 7 games this week. So we'll see right now just how often he plays.
Hang on. I want to say one more thing about catcher strategy. So I drafted in a 12-team mixed league, salary cap, Sunday night, deep benches, 2 utility spots, only 1 catcher spot. I actually went out of my way to get 2 catchers, and we actually have daily transactions in that league. There's no cap on games played. So at some point, the best hitters left were actually catchers in the middle of the salary cap draft. So I went out of my way to add Salvador Perez. I already had a good first catcher. I don't remember who my first catcher was, but Salvador Perez was still available, and he qualifies at first base. And I thought, he's just going to help me fill. Again, I'm trying to get as many at-bats as I can.
Right.
And so Salvador Perez, if he's, or maybe he was better than my other catcher, I don't really remember, but I fall in love with guys who play multiple positions. And Salvador Perez is good enough to, quote unquote, be utility bat. He's good enough to play first base when my starting first baseman isn't available, or good enough as my utility corner. So that's one strategy that I like. Also, I'm going to point out a catcher. He's over 50% rostered, so we can't talk about him in the pickup segment. But Luis Campusano just looks legit, man. He's just a line drive machine. He's slipped over that 50% threshold that we use for pickups, but I would like to see him rostered 70, 80% of Yahoo leagues going forward. I think he's the real deal.
I hate that swing so much. I mean, like that stance. I just hate the totally open, hands way out in front. It's just so much going on to get to the same spot every time. But he had a great opening weekend. You definitely can't knock
it. He was great last year, man. What was it, like 6 weeks? But he was really good at the end of last year too.
And he is the guy there. So for sure, he's definitely a great player to roster. Obviously, the biggest. Well, we'll get to some of the biggest, but I think maybe the biggest hitter picked up this weekend was Oswaldo Cabrera for the Yankees. The reason behind that was that DJ LeMahieu, who fouled a ball off his foot, and they said it was a bruise. They found a fracture in his foot. So DJ LeMahieu is now out with a fracture in his foot. He's going to be reevaluated in 2 weeks. This is a guy who's been banged up for a while, is on the wrong side of 30, and who knows how quickly he's going to get back. I think you have to assume it's at least a month for LeMahieu, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. The Yankees traded for John Birdie, but John Birdie wasn't able to make the lineup by opening day. Oswaldo Cabrera got a start. He just started hitting, and so they kept him in the lineup. And over the weekend, he went 7 for 16, 2 home runs, 6 RBIs, 3 runs scored. He did strike out 6 times and took just 1 walk in 4 games. What are you doing in this situation? Do you think Birdie will eventually take that over? Do you think Oswaldo Cabrera will die down? Do you think one of these guys could take the job from DJ LeMahieu? Like, how are you approaching this?
I was shocked the market was, and I don't have a problem following hot hands and all that. Play something as long as it lasts, but he was such a horrible offensive player last year. 211, 275, 299 slash, the 58 OPS plus, 42% worse than the average Major League Baseball offensive player. He's only playing because there's a hole right now, but they traded for Birdie in part because they didn't like their infield depth. I think Birdie's and Birdie's not great by any means, although you talked about Craig Mish saying that Birdie didn't run last year because he wasn't healthy. I think Birdie's a much better player than Cabrera. I wouldn't add, unless you were in a super deep league and you were desperate, and in that point you may have already added Cabrera. Then it's in the past tense, but this screams out a massive fluke, and I think the Yankees know it too.
I fully agree with you. I don't have a problem adding him in the short term if you don't need to spend a lot of money. I think he's going to play often enough. There is some power speed in there. He across 2 levels in 2021 hit 29 homers and stole 21 bases. in 2022, split between AAA and the majors. He hit 14 home runs and stole 13 bases, and that was just in 90 games. Last year, you mentioned he was on the big league roster for a while and didn't really perform. He did steal 8 bases in limited time. So there's something there, but you're going to get some swing and miss. You're not going to get a great batting average. I think that Birdie is eventually going to take on the majority of that playing time. But I cut Birdie for Willie Castro in one of my 12-team leagues this week.
I'll sign off on that for sure.
Because for me, I think Castro is going to play more often. You're getting them to do the same thing, right? You want speed, and you want a guy who plays multiple positions and will, jackknife into the lineup, or Swiss Army knife, into the lineup multiple different ways. I don't know. The Yankees were very open about loving getting Birdie as a depth infielder, and I think he's a depth infielder for them. I don't know that they would want him to be the starting third baseman if something happens with LeMahieu, where the timeline is altered. I think at the end of the day, it's probably a muddled mess between Cabrera and Birdie, where they'll both be kind of valuable while LeMahieu's out, but you don't really know when and how often one is going to play, and they'll have some hot streaks, and then LeMahieu's going to come back, and I think it's going to be cluttered.
I also want to congratulate the Yankees, who I said negative things about all spring training except for one player who we'll get to a little bit later. And they go into Houston. We know it's maybe it's not the Houston team they were a few years ago, but they're obviously seen as a team that could win the pennant. And they sweep the Astros in Houston 4 straight games. So I had the Yankees finishing well under their win total. I thought they had a chance to finish last in the division, maybe a losing record. You won the first week, New York Yankees. I tip my cap.
I'm glad you said you won the first week, because this is something, just a headliner note, just picture this in bright flashing neon over everything Scott and I are going to talk about for the rest of the day. It was 4 days, right? Hat tip to the Yankees. They looked really good. They fought back in a lot of those games, and that kind of fight is something that carries over. It's a very long season. And I say that for a couple of people that we're not going to talk about in this podcast, in terms of guys who maybe stood out to us with struggles, right? It was a bad first start for Bailey Ober. It was a bad first start for Max Fried, for Zach Eflin, for AJ Puck. A lot of these guys. Do not throw away months of preparation and analysis based on one outing. Take it in, acknowledge it, give yourself something to look for in subsequent outings, but don't just throw everything away off of one start. It really, we get so reactionary, and we want to find I got to get this waiver guy, so I'm going to drop, so-and-so to pick up the next guy on waivers. And so I'll tip a little bit of what we're going to talk about later, but I was talking to people on Twitter about, everybody was well, I dropped AJ Puck immediately, and because I couldn't not pick up Garrett Crochet. And it's okay, I get what you're saying, but AJ Puck had a 5% walk rate last year. Command was never an issue for him. So walking 6 guys in the first start, and that's the same for Bailey Ober, who walked a lot of guys and his command looked awful. But these guys aren't people who struggle with command. So I'm not going to throw away what I saw from them and what I think about them because of a bad start where they struggled in an area where they never usually struggle. And Puck is going to face the Angels this week, and Crochet is going to get the Braves. And so if we're talking on Sunday, you might now be saying, well, okay, AJ Puck looked really good. Crochet got crushed. Now I don't really know. Do I want Puck? Do I want Crochet? And it's just you need to think beyond just immediately right now sometimes. And these are pitchers where that the way that we look at those two guys may flip totally by next week. And so I didn't drop Puck anywhere. In the waiver wire column I advised holding him, because I think he looked good enough and has been a good enough pitcher in his career that he deserved more than one start. And the Angels are a perfect start, because if he looks even mediocre in that start, then fine. Then he looked really bad against the Pirates, and he looked mediocre against maybe the worst team or one of the worst teams in baseball. Fine. You can now say that's 2 really below average starts against 2 average to below average teams. But I cannot sign off on mass cutting pitchers out of rage after one start.
I agree with basically 95% of what you said. The one thing I will say is that I always want the absolute bottom of my roster to be fluid.
Yes.
And if you play in a shallower league, you 16, 18, 10 team mixed, where AJ Puck may have been your last pick, and you want to drop him for Jared Jones, you want to drop him for Jason Foley or something like that. Okay, yes. I'm fine with that. But obviously, look, baseball is a game about big samples, big data. And we have to make decisions in the short term before we have proof of anything. If you wait for proof in fantasy baseball, you're going to get beat in a competitive active league. That's just a fact of life.
Right.
So we're always merging the idea that we don't want to overreact to small samples, but we don't want to be late to stuff either. So there's a ebb and a flow. There's an art and a science mix to it. But for the most part, first of all, anybody who's a superstar, Julio Rodriguez didn't hit this week. Aaron Judge didn't hit this week. Jordan Alvarez didn't hit this week. I don't think Bryce Harper is a hit yet. So none of that matters to me. That stuff, right. As long as they're not hurt, and even if they're hurt, you're not going to cut them. I mean, you're not going to do anything rash for those guys. Those were your first or second round picks and all that stuff. But I want to be open to cut from the bottom of my roster. But in the case of a guy like Puck, he was so good in spring training. And I know a big question was what was the competition level and all that. And that's always going to be a question. Jack Flaherty looked really good in spring training. What was his competition level? Some Red Sox pitchers I'm going to talk about later. What was their competition level? Even was it this week at Seattle? But try to and you also talked last week when we were talking about how to handle the early part of the season. You talked about stabilization rates for different stats, and walks and strikeouts are going to get there really quickly. Again, I want you to be proactive. I want you to be aggressive where you need to be, but just keep the common sense. Don't be so open-minded that all the brains fall out of your head.
Yes, and as Scott, as you mentioned, it does depend on league types, right? AJ Puck had ADP just outside of the top 200 in the final couple of weeks. He was for most places not being drafted as like the final starting pitcher on your roster. But if you're in a 10-team league, or if you drafted early, he may have been the final starting pitcher on your roster. So that that can be different. Just making sure that we're not letting emotion override the decisions we make.
And also, you know what? I'll let almost anybody have multiple starts. I mean, your first start would have to be horrible,
right? To
the point that like they're taking you out of the rotation, or your velocity was so far down that they're going to give you an MRI. You're going to go see a doctor or something like that. You can't just too many good pitchers. Luis Castillo didn't have it. Aaron Nola didn't have it. You're never going to bench those guys. I mean. Right. Although Nola, I think, is one of the more frustrating, really good pitchers. Sometimes I wonder if his control is too good. But your advice is spot on, and I hope it's well heeded.
And we will talk about more pitchers and hitters that really stood out to us, both good and bad, of the first weekend. But before we do that, you need to get your weekdays started with Bet the Edge. Join Jay Croucher and Drew Dinsick as they break down the MLB, the NFL draft, the NBA, and much more. New episodes drop every weekday at 6 a.m. Eastern time on the NBC Sports YouTube channel, and you can find it in podcast form wherever you download and subscribe to your podcasts. So whether you're looking to get involved in the awards markets, player props, or futures, check out Jay and Drew for more insight at Bet the Edge. So hopefully the first weekend has given us an edge on some of these hitters and figuring out kind of where we're coming down on them. One of the performances that stood out for me, I guess, wasn't even a performance, and it was a player role. And this is a thing that you and I talked about of what is most important in the first few weeks of the season is pay attention to roles that are different than we expect, right? Because that can be actionable earlier. For me, it was Esteury Ruiz. Esteury Ruiz was on the bench for 2 of the first 4 games of the season for the A's. He was a big topic of conversation on Twitter when people are talking about, is Victor Scott just Esteury Ruiz? And this is part of the reason why I suggested no, because Esteury Ruiz is a very bad defender. He graded out terribly last year. And I think the A's realized that, and they very clearly don't see him as a full-time starter. Now, he could earn playing time back, right? That's not to say he's going to be on the bench the whole time, but he only started 2 of their 4 games in the opening series. For somebody whose value in fantasy is so dependent on a counting stat like steals, where he really needs to be in the lineup to have value, because if he's not in the lineup, he's obviously not accruing steals, and it's the only thing that he does well for you. this torpedoes his value for me. I don't think you have to drop him. I think you can keep him on your bench and see how the playing time shakes out the next week or two. But if he's a part-time player on one of the worst offenses in baseball where his only asset is speed, I just don't think you can carry him on your team.
A part-time player, no power, and even when he plays, he may be parked in the bottom third of the lineup, which is we're always very sensitive to where our speed guys hit because you want that extra at bat. Yeah, I mean, Ruiz, I think in any of my mixed leagues, if he were available on the waiver wire, I wouldn't even pick him up right now. I think he just the A's very quickly, and this is the theme too of the opening week. Okay, what have teams told us about situations and players? Maybe Detroit has told us how they feel about their bullpen right away, and that their presumed closer isn't really their closer. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I think the A's, I give them credit for rather than just throwing out Ruiz because he had a bunch of stolen bases last year and giving him a chance to play and lose the job, they realize he's not really one of their starters to begin with. I mean, they're telling you how they feel about him already. And this is, one of the worst rosters in baseball. So if you have Ruiz in anything short of a gigantic mixed league, I think he's droppable immediately.
Yeah, I agree with you. What's the one hitter that stood out to you in the first weekend?
Yeah, I talked about the Yankees, 4-0, right? Anthony Volpe did not play because of illness on Sunday, but looked terrific in the rest of the series. He's already walked 4 times. He had 3 walks. What he did opening day, right? They threw 17 pitches to him out of the strike zone. He didn't swing at 16 of them. And the one pitch he did swing at, he hit a single. I think eventually he's going to, and I know he hit 209 last year, the batted ball metrics. This is all review from last week when I was just talking of Volpe. So, yes, the confirmation bias sign is flashing and the cup is full and all that. But I think he's going to be a star. He's already won a Gold Glove last year. And the Yankees, I could see them batting Volpe first or second at some point this season, maybe in the first half of the year, because he's shown he can command the strike zone. He drew walks last year. It just doesn't show because his average was so bad that made his OBP look bad. All he has to do is hit like 250 or 260, and then the OBP will look like a leadoff hitter. I think Anthony Volpe is, and again, it sucks that when he got off to this great start, he couldn't play on Sunday because he was sick, and maybe he won't play today. But Anthony Volpe is going places, and I wish I had him rostered. I have some shares. I wish I had him in like half my teams. I'm very thrilled with his start. And again, we talk about what stats crystallize quickly, stabilize quickly, and walk the strikeout rate gets there really quick. The fact that he's commanding the strike zone, and we talked all spring about what he'd done to change his swing. Anyway, he's not going to hit 209 ever again. He can hit 250 to 270 for the balance of his career with a ton of category juice, with a good batting eye. He'll eventually score 100 runs a year. I could not be higher on this guy.
Yeah, I like that. I'll give a deeper league middle infielder that caught my eye over the opening weekend. It was Brice Turang with the Brewers. We knew that the injury to Garrett Mitchell would shake up a little bit of what the Brewers were going to do. It made Sal Frelick not in every day, but it made Sal Frelick an outfielder against right-handed pitching as opposed to potentially a third baseman. And that seemed to open up the spot at second base for Brice Turang to be the second baseman against right-handed pitching. Now, that was probably going to be the case at the beginning, but we've seen that in the first series that Brice Turang started whenever there was a righty on the mound. What's interesting to me is that he looked pretty good. He went 2 for 5 in his first start. He went 2 for 4 in his second start. In the first start, he stole 3 bases in one game. In the second start, he stole 1 base. So he has 4 stolen bases in 3 games played, but in just 2 starts. And he has gone 5 for 11 to start the season. Now, he has no walks and 3 strikeouts in those 2 starts. And that is part of the issue with Brice Turang is, will he make enough contact? However, he's never had a strikeout rate over 21%. So even though it's like, oh, will he hit enough in the major leagues? I don't really think that the question for him is like, is he going to be a 30%, 27% strikeout rate guy? It's just, is he going to hit more than 230? And so, but I look at the speed performance here and I think if I was rostering Esteury Ruiz, I would rather just roster Brice Turang because I know he's playing against right-handed pitching. He has as much, not as much speed, but he has elite speed and could be a great stolen base asset for you. And he's in a much better lineup. the Brewers lineup than the A's lineup. He's in a much better home ballpark, the Brewers ballpark, than the A's ballpark. And yeah, he's not going to hit lots of power, but neither is Esteury Ruiz. And, could he hit, if he hits enough, if he hits 250, 260, I think Brice Turang is playing, every game against righties in Milwaukee. And to me, that's interesting if I needed speed in a deeper format.
I love it. Stolen bases, one of the big things I pay attention to when the games start. What teams are running, what players are running, who's got a green light, who doesn't have a green light. And I'll focus on, there are 6 teams, Eric, that don't have a stolen base yet. And one of them is the Angels, where Ron Washington said, all spring, we're going to run like crazy. Now, part of this was that not only were they not getting on base against the Orioles, but in a couple of those games, they fell so far behind. A stolen base doesn't make a lot of sense when you're down 7-1. You don't want to run the outs on the bases when you're trying to make a comeback. I get that, but only one attempt for the Angels, no stolen bases. The other 6 teams, the 6 teams in total that don't have a steal: Angels, Royals, Blue Jays, Cubs, Mets, and Giants. Now the other Royals, whatever. Bobby Witt will steal 5 bases this week, and nobody will think about that again. Interesting, the Giants last year were actually dead last in stolen bases. They didn't even attempt to steal, I don't believe, in the opening half week. So it's something they don't want to do. Maybe Estrada will steal 15 bases, but they're kind of a red light team. And I also like to see that the teams that get stolen bases in clumps. We know the Reds, they've attempted 9 steals. They've only made it 2/3 of the time, but whatever, they're going to be a track team. And I thought it was also interesting in that same series, there was a 3-steal game from CJ Abrams. I saw some analysts who were worried about how many bags he would steal this year if his stolen bases were really that stable. Was he like 47 out of 52 last year? And he's a young guy with a
everybody
pedigree.
said it would come down. He couldn't steal that many bases in that few attempts, but it was shocking to me how many people looked at a guy that young with that kind of pedigree who made clear changes in the second half of the season and were like, "Oh, he'll never be that good again." It's like,
I don't understand it. And also, I did see that Lane Thomas, a lot of people thought he'd give back his stats last year, and he got off to a poor start this season, but he had a good game on Sunday and stole a couple of bases. And this is, sometimes you get teams that aren't really competitive. Washington's not going to be competitive this year. They're not going to be a playoff team, but they just seem to have an approach of the YOLO approach on the bases. Just run as much as you want. I think that's what they've said to Abrams and Thomas. You want a double steal. You want to run as much as you want. You want to try to steal second. You want to try to steal third. And remember too, I saw a couple of stolen base attempts just around the league in the last few days, because pickoff attempts are, they discourage you from doing them. You get a limited amount of them. And because in a certain finite amount of time, they have to deliver the ball. Mark Canha stole a base. And Mark Canha is not a fast guy. He's not going to steal a ton of bases. But he stole a base against the White Sox. We just took a walking lead, and then just started running because he knew the pitch had to be delivered. And you see these giveaway stolen bases. Then that's from Mark Canha, who's a journeyman with average speed. I don't see any reason why. Not only will Abrams get to the 40+ steals he had last year, I mean, I don't see any reason why he couldn't steal 60 or 70 bases. And I made it a point last night in that salary cap draft that I said, I don't have any Abrams yet. I don't think this team's going anywhere. I love what he turned into last year when he got the leadoff spot. He had a pedigree. He was a big part of that Juan Soto trade. I'm not sitting out the CJ Abrams experience, so I made sure I got him last night. The final ticket wasn't anything exorbitant, but at least I'm not. That's what those last drafts are for, right, Eric? They're the FOMO drafts. Well, CJ Abrams was a FOMO pick for me. In the meantime, hey, Ron Washington, I don't care what you guys do this week. At least try to steal some bases, even if you get thrown out. And I get it. When Anthony Rendon's going 0 for 10 with 100 strikeouts, you can't steal a base. I get it, but I'd like to see them run a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's they played Baltimore. I'm just looking right now in the 3 games against Baltimore. The Angels had a total of 13 singles and 5 walks.
Yeah.
So that means 18 times they had a runner on first. And we don't even know if those times, if it was a runner on first and nobody on second, but that's not a lot of opportunities to steal second. And that will be a problem for the Angels, right? Their offense isn't particularly good. I don't think, they're not going to face the Orioles every weekend. So I do expect them to run a little bit more, but it will always be a risk with those guys.
And when you get sick of Anthony Rendon batting leadoff, or when he invariably gets hurt or decides just to want to play baseball anymore, put our boy Zach Neto in the leadoff spot.
Do it. Just put him up there.
Yeah,
let him run wild. I'm gonna just close. We're closing with 3 outfielders here in the hitters that stood out to us. I have 2 guys who looked really good. It's funny, Lourdes Gurriel. When I downloaded the ATC projections and I plugged them into Tanner Bell's SGP sheet, and it spits out like, composite rankings and all that. And Gurriel kept coming up like higher than outfielders where I wanted to draft him. Like he was going like kind of in like, or he was ranked in like a little bit of like that Jordan Walker territory. And I was like, nah, I'd rather have guys like Tyler O'Neill, or I'd rather have, the guys that were in that cluster. Like he was ahead of like Teoscar Hernandez, and trying to think of like who else was in that range. Like I think it was like Dalton Varsho, whatever. And I kind of like wrote off Lourdes Gurriel a little bit. Like, fine, I have no problem with him, but he didn't seem like somebody who was going to really move the needle in fantasy. Then he might not over the course of a full season, but he did have 3 home runs and 10 RBIs in 4 games to start the year. He is hitting in the middle of the Diamondbacks order. That is a pretty good roster. And so, Lourdes Gurriel isn't going to be found on a lot of waiver wires, but he may have been somebody who a lot of people drafted near the end of their draft because they thought, okay, I guess he's going to start. Like I'll take a starting outfielder and see what I get from him. And early on, you're getting a lot of production. He looks really good to me. The Diamondbacks lineup looks really good. I think the Dodgers are clearly the favorite in that division, but I think the Diamondbacks are going to prove last year was no fluke. And then the other guy is kind of like a deeper formats ad. But, Michael Conforto had 2 home runs and 5 RBIs over the first weekend. There was a really great piece on The Athletic that I linked to in my Sunday waiver wire article over at NBC Sports, where he basically said that, he missed all of 2022 with an injury. And he basically was like, I was in terrible shape last year in 2023. Like I was just not ready for a full baseball season. Like my body was worn down. I was exhausted. All these things that we don't necessarily take into account. We're like, oh, he missed 2022, so he came back healthy in 2023. And it's like, sure, his shoulder may have been healthy, but his body clearly wasn't. So he kind of like revamped the physique a little bit over the offseason, slimmed down, tried to get to the point where he could play a full season. And then he did some work on his swing to get back to, who he was in 2018, 2019, and the COVID shortened 2020 season where, he was a really good hitter with plus power. He had over 60 home runs combined in 2018 and 2019. I think he's going to play 75% of the time for San Francisco. I know they like to platoon a lot, but they can't platoon everybody. And Conforto seems like he's going to be in that lineup. And this is a guy who I think we forget that he was a really talented hitter. Not just with power, but like his actual swing, his hand-eye coordination, his plate discipline. It would not surprise me if Conforto put up a solid season. I don't think that he's like, all of a sudden pushing to be like a top 30 outfielder in fantasy formats, but I think he's certainly worth rostering in, your 15 team leagues and deeper, because he's got enough pop to hit home runs in that stadium. The top part of that Giants lineup is pretty solid, and he could get runs and RBIs. And I am willing to take the gamble on somebody who has shown a skill before that he can find that skill again.
Right. Yeah. The old Ron Chandler, once you display a skill, you own it. And Conforto, who I'm definitely rooting for, I fell in love with him during his first run with the Mets. He reminds me a lot of Mitch Haniger. Okay. Conforto's career OPS plus 121. Haniger's is 119. Obviously, Conforto's a lefty and Haniger is a righty, but they both play in parks that suppress power, suppress offense. So that's a little bit of a kill. As you mentioned with Conforto, he may end up in a platoon. The Giants are a platoon-heavy team, so maybe there's a cap on Conforto's playing time. Now there's a give and a take with that. If Conforto isn't playing against lefties, it's going to help his average probably stay in a better spot. And also, he may come into some of those games. Like we saw Jared Kelenic get off to a good start. Well, he's platooning, and that's frustrating. He's batting ninth. That's frustrating too. But you come into some games that you don't start, and you get some activity. Kelenic had a RBI or a run scored or something like that late in that game against Philadelphia on Sunday. By the way, Chris Sale looked really good. I no idea what to expect from Chris Sale this year, but it was fun to see him pitch well, and I'm looking forward to watching him pitch against Brandon Pfaadt next week, which is a Saturday game. I already have circled on my calendar. Pfaadt had his way against the Rockies, but Haniger, in a lot of leagues, I was looking at Haniger and Conforto as waiver pickups. And I think in one league, I went for Haniger first, Conforto second. Haniger went to the max for some other team. My friend Timmy snapped up Haniger, so we got Conforto in that league. Maybe the idea of the platoon caps Conforto's upside. I think Conforto, if they both hit the high end of their range, I think Conforto's the better player. but maybe Haniger's playing time is a little bit safer, although we'll see what happens when Mitch Garver is healthy again, because that will shift the calculus in the Seattle lineup. But just those guys remind me of each other. Haniger's a little bit older, but it wasn't that long ago that Conforto was an all-star. It wasn't that long ago that Haniger had a 39-100 season, maybe going back to Seattle. And coincidentally, Haniger, of course, was with the Giants for a little bit. He's had trouble staying healthy. Conforto's had trouble staying healthy. But they're still at ages where a comeback season, I think, is something that has a reasonable chance of happening.
Yeah, I said I had Mitch Haniger in the waiver wire column too. I said he's never really throwing out last year, but he's never really had a problem producing when healthy, and I'm going to keep him on my team.
A healthy Mitch Haniger will hit, and then a healthy Michael Conforto will hit too.
Yeah. We're going to slide to some pitchers now who impressed us or who caught our eye for both good and bad reasons over the opening weekend. For me, I have to start with Bobby Miller. He was downright electric in that first start against the Cardinals. The big thing I had Miller as my 15th ranked starting pitcher this year. So for me, it was believing that the strikeout upside was there. He had an 8.6 K per nine in his debut last year, and people said, oh, well, the strikeouts may not be there. Well, he had 11 strikeouts in 6 innings in the opener. He gave up only 2 hits, no runs, 1 walk against the Cardinals. It was just, for me, the raw stuff is so good. He averaged 98.8 on the fastball, and there's these sequences where he's like painting 100 miles an hour on the corner and then throwing just stupid changeups. He revamped his changeup a little bit to take some velocity off of it to create more differentiation with the fastball. It looked great, had a 33% whiff rate. He also changed his slider. It's harder and it has a little bit less. It has a lot less actually vertical drop. So it's kind of more gyro slider cutter-ish. That got a lot of called strikes too. So I just think, yes, he only had 9 whiffs, but he had a bunch of called strikes. His arsenal works really good together. We know he has electric raw stuff. I said that I think it would not be out of the question if Bobby Miller leads the Dodgers in innings pitched this year. I think it's entirely possible he can go 6 or 7 innings every time he's out, provided he's pitching well. And this guy could be a top 5 starting pitcher in baseball next year.
I'm over the moon for Miller, and I kept not getting him in leagues because I think he was well regarded by my opponents. And then you watch him strike out 11 guys in 6 innings. And you think, okay, this is going to be maybe I need another league, as I mentioned. But the only question is, last year, I think Kershaw led the Dodgers in innings pitched. I think he crept over 130. We talk a lot about them already being the playoffs. And what a curious rotation they have, right? I mean, they're waiting for Walker Buehler, who just had a rehab assignment, didn't go that well the first start. He'll get a few more of those before he pitches. What's realistic for him? 100 innings, 120 innings? I don't know, 110 innings. Kershaw will come back at some point. You think maybe they'll trade for somebody in the middle of the season? I mean, their approach to starting pitching is like, you know what? Let's have like 7 or 8 awesome pitchers, and then we'll see what we have in October and who's healthy and who isn't. But it's not. I know Yamamoto, big free agent signing, and Kershaw's going to the Hall of Fame, and Walker Buehler, when healthy, is a Cy Young contender. Bobby Miller could start opening game of a playoff series. That's what his upside is. That's how good he is.
I think. Yes, I'm this Bobby Miller. I mean, it's unfortunate Yuri Perez got hurt, but there was like this Bobby Miller, Yuri Perez, Grayson Rodriguez. But throw in Tarek Skubal. There's this crew of young pitchers that are rising up that I'm really intrigued by, and I think a lot of it is the raw stuff they have. But I also think we see pitchers succeed a lot based on the organization and based on just kind of like maximizing what tools they bring. And I'm really glad that you want to talk about the Red Sox rotation. Before we talk about one pitcher in particular, I wanted to point out that there's a stat. The Red Sox had the fewest four-seam fastballs in baseball over the first weekend. The Red Sox threw just 12.9% four-seam fastballs. They were second in baseball in cutter slider usage. And when we talk about like, oh, the Red Sox overhauled their pitching development in the offseason. They brought in a new pitching coach. They brought in a new pitching director. They hired Kyle Boddy from Driveline, right? people think, oh, pitch mixes, they're going to add this pitch, they're going to do that. Sometimes it's just, it's not about adding a pitch. It's about taking the pitches the pitchers already throw and saying, all right, we're going to approach this differently. And that's why these things sometimes can make a real impact. Is the Red Sox clearly have a huge philosophical change in terms of their starting pitching in just one offseason. And it was only one weekend, but their starters all looked tremendous against a good Seattle Mariners team.
Yes, against a good Seattle team who I think is going to the playoffs. Although, of course, pitching in Seattle is the best assignment you can have in the American League. But still, for this staff, 4 starts, they had 1 walk. They had 27 strikeouts. Now, I also mentioned the Orioles staff had the same strikeout to walk ratio, but they were playing against the Angels, who nobody has anything good to say about if Mike Trout's not up. Or, again, we talk Zach Neto a lot, but
right.
The Angels are a team you want to attack. Mariners, better team. And all 4 of the Red Sox starters, and maybe they were hiding in plain sight. Nick Pivetta was really good when he tweaked his repertoire in the second half last year. Cutter Crawford averaged more than the strikeout per inning. He had decent control. His ERA estimators were better than his front door. It's one of those things where the ERA is over 4 and your mind is just trained to discount that. Okay, it's over 4, it's bad. And all the under the surface stats are like, no, he actually was pitching better than that. And he's at an age, age 28 season, I want to say, for Crawford. I mean, where he could get better. You mentioned Bailey and some of the personnel changes they made. And Andrew Bailey had a good track record in San Francisco. Success has many parents, right? When somebody takes off, it's hard to know. Is it the pitcher himself? Is it his pitching coach? Is it his catcher? Is he happier off the field? Is he taking better care of himself? Did he go to drive line? It's so hard to tell sometimes, but enough good things have happened around Andrew Bailey that I have to figure that he's part of the special sauce. Yeah. Now, I wish you could pick up a lot of these guys. You can't. Garrett Whitlock is the one of the 4 who is addable using that 50% cutoff. But before the season, I thought to myself, I like this rotation. I wish there was a front man, a 1 or a 2 starter, and maybe Pivetta can be that guy. Maybe Crawford could be that guy. Brian Bayo we've liked for a while, and we know he's done a lot of work with Pedro Martinez, and what better person to learn a slider from than Martinez. Now, we got to see them do it in Fenway, right? Again, they just did it in Seattle, and with all due respect to the Mariners, when you have that backdrop, you can attack the strike zone because you're not afraid that when you throw the pitch in the strike zone that they're going to hit it out of the park. In Fenway, even though Fenway's misunderstood, it's not really a home run park, but it's a great offensive park. There's almost no foul territory, and it's just an offensive Disneyland. So we'll see how these guys handle it there. But I missed one league. One head-to-head league where people were starting to fill their IL spots, and I didn't realize Cutter Crawford was undrafted, and that killed me. Although I'm very much overweight on Cutter Crawford. I have a fair amount of Pivetta. I have some Bayo. I traded for him in a league where I needed pitching, and I think Whitlock's an interesting pickup too. Just this rotation. I think the Red Sox are going to be good. I don't think they can be great, but I think they can be good. And there's one other special sauce, or just maybe it's not special, but last year, they were a horrible defensive team. I mean, Enrique Hernandez was their shortstop half the time, for crying out loud. You plug in Story at short. The outfield defense has been revamped, right? Tyler O'Neill has gold gloves in his closet. And, Rafaela is terrific in center field. The defense went from being bad to being good overnight. That can't be understated.
I've been in on Whitlock for a while, so I hope this is the year. The other starting pitcher you can pick up, and this, depending on how your leagues do waivers, this article this podcast will post on Monday afternoon. Tanner Houck starts tonight against the A's.
Right, Houck.
Tanner Houck gets a 2-step this week against the A's and the Athletics. It really doesn't get that much better than being able to face the A's. Sorry, the A's and the Angels. It doesn't get that much better to face the A's and the Angels as your 2 starts.
A dream. And then they get the Angels again in Fenway the following week. Yeah. And also remember, we're going to give pickups obviously regularly on this podcast, but also Rotoworld, not only their notes, their constant daily notes, indispensable. You guys are also doing a couple of waiver pickups, which are being simulcast on Yahoo as well. So you can see them in the Yahoo game. You can obviously see them all over Rotoworld. So that stuff, that's the most important thing we do, right? Who's available out there? What can I get, quote unquote, for free? I just got to find somebody I want to cut, or I have that IL spot to work with. You're constantly looking for these moves. So make sure you're reading all that content, because, and I love the way you phrased it too with I think it was your piece where you were actually giving the specific frame of, not only the long version, but just the the identification tag of what's different here. Okay, roll change, picks,
Right.
mix,
Yeah.
velocity up, whatever. You're giving the the elevator pitch for these guys before you get a little bit more into detail. Or I have 5 seconds. Why am I picking up this guy? I have
Right.
5 seconds. You're giving me that, which I love.
That was my thought, was like, I just want you to say, okay, if you're going through this and you're like, okay, I need speed. Who am I adding?
Mhm.
Like, maybe you just scroll through and you look for speed, and you're like, all right, these are the 3 guys that I'm adding if I need speed. But yeah, that article will come out every Sunday, around 11 noon ish. So keep an eye on that. And as Scott mentioned, we have all the news blurbs over at Rotoworld. One of the guys who I'm not dropping because he was an early pick, but I didn't have many shares of Zac Gallen because I was concerned about a pitcher who had arm issues in the past, who's coming off a season where he threw 240 plus innings with the postseason included. And then I know that the stat line doesn't look bad against the Rockies, but Zac Gallen was down 2 miles an hour or over on all of his pitches in the first start. And so, again, we've talked about this a bunch. Velocity tends to increase as the season goes on. So I'm not concerned, but I'm watching this, because if Gallen's velocity doesn't start ticking up as April goes on, you're then starting to look at, like, maybe, he just has not bounced back from that season the way that we want it to. He's a guy who needs kind of like every mile per hour. He doesn't have overpowering stuff in terms of, like, his stuff plus grades. His raw pitch grades don't grade off the charts. He relies a lot on command and the sequencing of his pitches. So if individual pitches are off in terms of how much they move or how fast they come in or the velocity difference between the pitches, it really is a little bit like it could be like a house of cards situation for him, where it weakens one of the foundations and then the rest of the arsenal suffers because of it. So I'm not dropping Gallen, but I'm watching, because the velocity, I think, is important for him if I want to feel like he's fully healthy.
I know this probably isn't a satisfying way to frame it, but all during draft season, you talked about that workload, and they obviously go deep in the playoffs. The playoffs are so much longer now. So you get to 240 innings at a time where nobody throws that many innings anymore, a guy with an injury history. So this year in draft season, when every time Gallen made sense, I was taking George Kirby, I was taking Pablo Lopez, right. I was taking Tariq Skubal, I was taking Logan Webb. I was even thinking, you know what, I'll wait around and take Freddie Peralta or Framber Valdez. Peralta looked great this week. Valdez not so much, but I still feel really good about both of those. And Brewer fans are over the moon for. My friend Frank Schwab is like, just get me like 30 starts from Peralta. I know he's going to have ridiculous. He could lead the league in strikeouts. That's how good Freddie Peralta is. But so Gallen's a guy I'm nervous about too, and he's not the biggest guy in the world either, which you worry about. Generally, your aces and your horses. I mean, there's a reason you call them horses, because they're like 6'3", they're 6'4", and Gallen's a little bit slighter, but I think he'll be okay. I think he's set up to have a mildly disappointing season. It's not like, oh my God, trade him right now. You get to cash in your chips, and it's your team. If you believe in Gallen for whatever reasons you believe in him, I don't have a problem with that. But he was somebody certainly I was nervous about during draft season.
Yeah, one of the guys who is built like a horse is the guy that you really were impressed by in his first start, which is a 6'4", 225-pound Jack Flaherty.
Yeah, well, I talked about Chris Sale earlier. Love a good comeback story. Sale's in his mid-30s. Flaherty's still in his late 20s, and it wasn't that long ago he was a superstar for the Cardinals and was all. I think he might have gone the driveline one year. I mean, just somebody who was, it seemed, a total get-it guy, and I thought was going to be a Cy Young Award winner at some point. And he got hurt and stayed hurt and just fell off the map. And now he, 6'4", 1117 against the White Sox. The White Sox are horrible. I get it. You don't want to give that a lot of credit. But again, this Detroit schedule, the Mets this week, not worried about that. And then they get the A's, although Flaherty will get a start against his next start will come against Oakland. And then they get Pittsburgh, and then they get Minnesota. And, for all I know, a third of the Minnesota lineup won't be playing that day. I don't mean to be coy about it, but whatever. Right. It is what it is. The Tigers are winning this division. I know the White Sox are probably the worst lineup in baseball, and it's going to get worse if Eloy Jimenez can't play. But and man, think of how bad it may look in the middle of the year if the White Sox actually trade what's left of that team. You want starters. I want you to find, and if it's not Jack Flaherty, that's fine. I want you to look at the waiver wire and say, maybe you're picking up Brady Singer, or maybe you're, I don't know. Just find guys in this division. It's a division of pillow landings. The walks and strikeouts fit in his opening start, Flaherty start. He was getting good movement on his pitches. He passed the eye test for sure. Frank was talking about 30 starts from Peralta. I would just love to see what Jack Flaherty could do with 25 healthy starts. I think you'd get such a huge win with that. So, and if you can't, maybe he's gone in your league, or maybe that you have scar tissue with Flaherty. How about Reese Olson, who's pitching Monday and pitching Sunday, so he gets a 2-step this week. The Mets.
Casey Mize.
Why not Casey? I mean, this division was so deep. This rotation was so deep. Matt Manning, who's an interesting pitcher, didn't even make the rotation.
Yeah, I love the Jack Flaherty call. I think what Detroit is clearly showing that they can also make tweaks to their starting pitching in terms of how they're, even if they don't overhaul their pitch mixes, right? They are they're making tweaks to, like, Flaherty threw almost 50% sliders. He was really pounding the slider. He scrapped the cutter. They're just changing the way he's attacking people. Mize, Manning, these guys picked up vertical movement on their fastballs. So I really love that. In that same series, I came away really taken with Garrett Crochet, like everybody else did. He added a cutter this year that was 94 miles an hour. He's a lefty, so it comes in on the hands of righties. I think that's a really important weapon for him if he's going to be a starter. I really, the fastball's up a little bit from last year, which is great because you don't really see it go up when moving from the bullpen to the starting rotation. Obviously, he was coming off an injury last year as well. He seems to have tweaked his changeup a little bit. All of this stuff looks great for Garrett Crochet. I don't think you can start him next week because this week because he faces the Braves. Now that's not to say don't pick him up, but this is one of those things where it's like I wasn't bidding so aggressively on him in leagues where he was available because I was like, I'm not going to play him this week. And so, yeah, he might be a good pickup during the season. But again, we just talked about how bad his team is. And he's transitioning to the rotation, so we don't know how consistent he'll be. And I already know right now that I'm not pitching him. So, that takes his immediate value down a little bit. And then, yes, he should, after that, get a matchup against, looks like, the Guardians. And so, yeah, I'd probably start him then. Right. But these are the things you need to factor in. But I liked what I saw from Garrett Crochet, and I have no problem adding him. But again, I would not be playing him against the Braves.
Wise advice. Last one's from me. We could have had this at the top. He's probably been added in your league if it's competitive for safe. Jason Foley looks really good. Mm-hmm. And the Tigers, AJ Hinch just told you without telling you that they don't trust Alec Lang, who pitched one game, couldn't find the plate, walked 3 guys. It wasn't even that high leverage spot. So I think Foley, who the Detroit radio guys were just gushing about how much more vertical movement he's getting on his sinker. He was okay last year. He looks a lot better this year. Yeah. Shelby Miller was getting some work in high leverage. I could see maybe 5 or 10 saves, maybe percolating to Miller, but Foley's this guy. We know for all the talk of it's a long season, short sample. If there's one thing about fantasy you have to react to quickly, it's the closers, it's the saves, right? And in Texas, Jose Leclerc pitched horribly twice in a row. They have other options. David Robertson, the only thing really against him is he's age 38, age 39 season, something like that. But they brought him in on a decent contract. They have a lot of other options here. Kirby Yates is just one of them, but there are other guys too. I don't know who their closer is going to be. I just don't think it's going to be Jose Leclerc. Robinson's my first bet there, but there are a lot of tickets that you could punch in Texas.
Yeah, I've never been full in on Leclerc. I have Josh Spores in a few like AL deeper and AL only leagues in case he gets some shots. I love picking up both Foley or Shelby Miller. I think there will be chances for both of those guys. Foley has some splits issues against lefties, so maybe they use Miller. Miller looked good in his start. The last guy I'm talking about is Jared Jones. I've been.
You tried to tell people. I did not listen to you preseason, and am I kicking myself?
I wrote him up as many places as I could. I have him rostered in a whole bunch of places. He looks electric. I mean, yes, 88% of his pitches were either slider or fastball, but again, on just those 2 pitches, he had 21 whiffs. So he doesn't really need more than that. but he does have a fine curveball and changeup that he can give hitters other things to look at. But this is a guy who had a 46% whiff rate and a 40% CSW in his first start. Yes, there will be ups and downs. He's a rookie pitcher, right? But again, also another thing that's interesting, he threw over 120 innings in both 2022 and 2023 in the minors. So there's no reason he should throw less than 140 innings. He's already shown the ability to go 122, 127. So this is not a situation where I'm expecting like low 100s innings. I think he's going to get a shot to pitch, as long as he can. And maybe the Pirates are out of contention by the end of August, which we think they will contend, but maybe they don't. And the Pirates decide, okay, you're shut down for September. We cross that bridge and we get there. I think you're going to get a long time of Jared Jones in the rotation. And I think that he is going to be really, really dynamic. There's the slider is a harder slider, right? It averages 88 miles an hour. So it's not as prone to splits issues like a sweeper. But, if you run into a team that has really good left-handed hitting, he may have a weaker start here or there. But I would be picking him up wherever I could and holding on to him.
Yeah, my former podcast mate, Michael Salfino, had a rule that basically anytime you see double-digit strikeouts from anybody, just pick them up. But in the case of Jones, it comes on the heel of having some pedigree and having an unbelievable spring training where he didn't allow any runs. And He's always had those strikeout rates in the minors. So again, you were pounding the table for him in spring training. And it wasn't like I was against the case. I just had other guys I liked more, or I don't know. I had reasons to not be proactive about it. And now everywhere I look, he's gone in my league. So I have all the fun. That's why I need another draft. I need a Jared Jones draft.
And these are things that's the perfect thing is like these types of players, like Crochet fits that bill perfectly too, is just put them on the watch list or keep an eye on it. Young pitchers like this without the track record, if they have a bad start or two, you may be in leagues where somebody goes, I'm done, right? They don't trust them anymore. Yes, he was a hot pickup. Then he had a bad stretch and they get thrown back on the wire, and then you may get your chance again. So with these kind of guys, don't ever fully abandon them. Scott and I are going to end the podcast by giving you a couple waiver wire picks from guys that we didn't talk about, or just giving you roster percentages for guys we did talk about. Before we do that, just a reminder that you can find all episodes of the Rotoworld Baseball Show and all your other favorite NBC sports shows on Amazon Music. So just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports to get the episodes of the Rotoworld Baseball Show and your other NBC sports shows. So just a couple numbers for guys we did talk about. Jason Foley is 46% rostered in Yahoo formats, and Shelby Miller is only 3% rostered. So you will find both of those guys on a lot of places. Jared Jones is 40% rostered. So again, in Yahoo formats, he's available in 60% of leagues. We mentioned Michael Conforto. He is rostered in just 23% of Yahoo leagues, and Mitch Haniger is rostered in just 25% of Yahoo leagues. So these are both good outfield options if you get a chance. And then Garrett Whitlock is rostered in 34% of Yahoo leagues. Tanner Houck is rostered in just 18%. So those are the two wildly available Red Sox guys. Reese Olson, who Scott mentioned, is rostered in 18% of Yahoo leagues. So he is available in a bunch. Two guys I want you to try to pick up who we haven't mentioned are the Reds outfield duo of Will Benson and Jake Fraley. Will Benson, 27% rostered in Yahoo formats. Jake Fraley, 25% rostered in Yahoo formats. Will Benson's hitting second in the lineup against righties, and Will Benson is playing against lefties. Jake Fraley has gone to the bench against lefties in the early part of the season, so I will prioritize Will Benson. However, I believe they both have really good power, speed. Fraley in his first, in the opening weekend start showed in just one game, he got on base multiple times. He scored 2 runs. He stole a base. These are guys who are going to have a long stretch of playing time as TJ Friedl, continues to get healthy. But again, against right-handed pitching right now, Nick Martini is the team's starting DH. And while Nick Martini had a great opening weekend, I think it's safe to say that even as TJ Friedl gets healthy and comes back into the lineup, there's probably no reason why it's not TJ Friedl in center field, Will Benson or Jake Fraley DHing, and Nick Martini out of the lineup against righties. So I don't see any reason why Benson and Fraley aren't don't continue to start versus all right-handed pitchers while they're healthy. Benson, even against some lefties. So I would be picking up both of these guys.
I'm sure somebody's already written it somewhere. They talk about who's the Tuffy Rhodes, who's the guy. Tuffy Rhodes was a player in the 90s who came over from Japan. He hit 3 home runs on opening day, and then he basically fell off the earth shortly after that. Nick Martini just screams out, he's like this year's Tuffy Rhodes. Also want to mention, and I know you have him in the rundown, JD Davis is just a good, solid offensive player who I'm pulling for him, especially because he had a really good year for the Giants a couple of years ago. Last year, he was above league average offensive player. Not a great player, but not a bad player. I think he won his arbitration award, and then the Giants, by a loophole, were able to get out of it. And I'm just glad that Davis has latched on with the A's. He's off to a good start. He hit a couple of home runs. He's hitting 385. But this is somebody, his career slash is 262, 344, 435, OPS plus a 114, which gives him a little bit of bump because he's usually hit in bad places, bad ballparks. That won't help you for fantasy, but he's a better than average offensive player who is going to bat anywhere from 3 to 6 and admittedly a bad Oakland lineup. He should be rostered in medium and deeper leagues and widely available. Let's see, right now he's at 9%. So JD Davis is a good guy to go out and get.
Yeah, and they were home over the weekend, and he hit 2 home runs. I think we know that he has the power to hit out of any ballpark. So even though that isn't a hitter-friendly environment, he can still be a good hitter. You mentioned Mark Canha before. He is 5% rostered in Yahoo formats. This is a guy who's playing pretty much every day for Detroit and hitting in the middle of that lineup. He's been hitting 5th for them in the early going. Again, 35 years old, boring, but he has a home run and a steal through his first 3 games. He's always been 250, 260 hitter. So I think like he should be able to contribute in a lot of different ways for your fantasy teams. And so I think Mark Canha is somebody who needs to be rostered in deeper formats. Again, 5% rostered right now. So there's a lot of value there. I'll mention quickly his teammate, Parker Meadows, who's only 23% rostered in Yahoo formats. He was my pick to be this year's Josh Lowe. I know he didn't get off to a great start to the season, but I think that Parker Meadows, who's hitting leadoff for the Tigers, is in for a really good year. And then I'll just throw out, people always say, well, these guys aren't available in my league. Well, Tyler Freeman is only 2% rostered in Yahoo formats. He's available in pretty much all league types. This is a guy who I heard the Guardians were going to be using him all over the field. And then it turns out he won the starting center fielder job. He's playing versus both righties and lefties. He seems to be in the lineup all the time. He was a prospect. He's only 24 years old. He was a prospect who, again, was a typical Guardians prospect where like he had really high batting averages. He was making a lot of contact. He didn't have a lot of power, but he would swipe, double digit bases in a season. Stole 19 in 2019, stole 15 last year between AAA and the majors. And so I look at a guy who currently has second base, shortstop, third base eligibility in Yahoo formats, is the everyday center fielder for the Guardians. So he will pick up outfield eligibility very soon, has the speed to steal 15 bases, will probably hit for a decent enough batting average, like something in the 260, 270 range. So if you're in a deeper format, a guy like that who is second, short, third, and outfield eligible has a lot of value in just filling in your roster when you need to move guys around. I have him in my AL only league and tout. I wouldn't be looking to add him in like a standard 12 or even a standard 15 team league, but in deeper formats, I think that he's somebody who really has value.
And the last 2 deeper guys I'll mention, not quite that deep, but we talked about Willie Castro, 10% rostered in Yahoo, 3 positions. There's just so many physical problems with the rest of that lineup that Willie Castro is going to get 500 at bats. And that we talked about that Michael Salfino rule, right? 10 strikeouts. Well, Brady Singer had 10 of them last week, has a pedigree, 15% rostered in Yahoo, and he gets those soft pillow landings in the AL Central, and he gets a good matchup this week. I think he gets the White Sox. So Brady Singer is certainly somebody, even if I didn't add him, I'm going to look forward to watching him pitch and see how he does.
They looked really great in that first start. Scott and I will be back with you again on Wednesday. I have a pitch mix, my pitch mix article, detailing pitchers with new pitches. That comes out every Wednesday now during the regular season over on NBC Sports. So make sure you check that out. My waiver article comes out on Sundays. Scott and I are always available and active on Twitter. You can follow me at Samski NYC. You can follow Scott at Scott_Pianowski. So thanks for tuning into the Rotoworld Baseball Show